Good evening, everybody. Great to see you. I'd like to also thank Rebecca for the incredible input, support and dedication she's given over the 3 years that she's been president. I can't think of a better way of summing it up than a note Rory Olkoto sent to me when I notified the board that she was moving on. He said the following: journalism loses a real star, the world of behavioural insight gains one. Not fair, really, but there you go. Rebecca will, of course, be brilliant in her new role, but journalism will miss her. I hope you'll join me in recognising that and wishing Rebecca well in her future. Now, if I can get this piece of paper. All right, here we go. The nominations in all the categories delighted and surprised the judges with a very competitive range of articles and topics. Hard-nosed investigative journalism, bedded in deep research, and well-balanced articles contributed to this year's winning entries, which the judges said were a privilege to read. Now, just a week ago, an altercation between two men at Oxford Circus tube station became a terrorist-related incident. The 90 minutes security alert resulted in 16 people being treated for minor injuries whilst trying to get away from the area. But the alert was long enough for a national newspaper to report a completely unsubstantiated incident based on a 2-week-old tweet about a lorry ploughing into people in Oxford Circus. Just how this approach to breaking news sits with the high standards of journalism we are going to recognise this evening is hard to imagine. And its support of the case for the freedom of the press is perhaps something our guest speaker will give us an insight into. Lord Black has been Executive Director of the Telegraph Media Group since 2005. Previously, he was Director of the Press Complaints Commission. He was Chairman of the Press Standards Board of Finance until 2014, responsible for shaping the industry's response to the Levinson inquiry and the establishment of IPSO. As chairman of the Legal Policy and Regulatory Affairs Committee of the News Media Association, he remains in the vanguard of the fight against Section 40 and leads the industry on other press freedom issues. He is currently Vice President of News Media Europe and Chairman of the Commonwealth Press Union Media Trust. He is actively involved in the industry's charities as patron of the Rory Peck Trust and Vice President of the Journalist Charity and the Printing Charity. He was created a life peer in 2010 and has spoken widely in the Lords on a range of issues, including media freedom. If somebody can throw some light on the future of the traditional press and how digital platforms and the Data Protection Act will fit into that, it's Guy. Please give a big welcome to Guy Black.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Gerald. And I think that may be the first time I've been described as wild in an introduction before. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, it's a delight to be here this evening, and thank you so much for asking me to join you at such an important occasion, marking, as we've heard, the very best in journalism. I've had my own version today of what I might describe as my Black Thursday, when everything seems to go manic to get things done. Anyway, I'm here with two important things I wanted to say. And the first is to highlight the huge importance of your journalism. The built environment, the House Building Construction Centre, is of massive importance to the UK economy and crucial to our long-term prosperity. And we saw that again when it was rightly the centrepiece of the Chancellor's budget. And the specialist press has an absolutely fundamental role to play in scrutinising it. Your publications quite rightly both champion the sector and the challenges it faces and seek to keep it up to the mark, breaking some great stories which then draw national and international attention, as we will see, I think, from the shortlists this evening. Indeed, the specialist press, of which you are a leading part, is one of the jewels in the crown of the UK's creative economy, and long may you remain so. But that said, the second thing I wanted to say this evening is that the whole of the printed media, be it national papers, local papers, magazines and periodicals, online and offline, face a number of very serious challenges in the coming years, hence the billing of what I was going to say as journalism under threat. One of them, of course, stems, as we all know, from the profound changes in the commercial underpinning of our industry and the establishment of what is now called the duopoly, the incredible might of Google and Facebook, whose commercial power is now so huge. By 2020, it is estimated that these two platforms will amass between them nearly 3/4 of all advertising revenue in the UK, leaving national newspapers, the local press, television, cinema, radio and outdoor advertising, magazines, the specialist press, to divide up what little is left between them. Just think about the enormity of that for one moment. And it's something that has incredibly serious consequences for all of us who are Democrats. For without a commercially successful press, there can never be a free press to scrutinise those in positions of power. There can never be a campaigning press. There can never be an investigative press that you need for democracy to function and root out those who abuse their power. But we face equally grave threats to those fundamental freedoms from changes in the law. And be in no doubt that it's something which impacts on everyone here in this room as much as it does on the national press that I come from, or the local press and the rest of the magazine and specialist sector. And think about what's happened over the last few years. We've had the Human Rights Act, which handed the courts significant powers in relation to privacy, which has had a substantial and corrosive impact on press freedom. We've had, as Gerald said, the whole issue of data protection legislation, which has brought into effect far-reaching controls on the processing of personal data, which extends to every aspect of the journalistic process, and which is again under scrutiny with the arrival of the General Data Protection Regulation. We've had the problem of investigative powers laws, anti-terrorist legislation, which was used to jail reporters at the News of the World convicted of phone hacking. We've had the Bribery Act, which can potentially stop newspapers exposing a crime if it means they have to pay a public official, an offence for which there is no public interest. We have a Criminal Justice Act, which includes powers to jail reporters for up to 2 years for breaches of data protection regulations. Now, in many of these areas, we've been able to persuade government of the damage such laws can do, and action has been taken to ameliorate the situation. But immense problems still remain, and by far the most dangerous of these is the laws which were introduced after the Leveson inquiry, when Parliament passed legislation for the first time in 318 years, which singled out the press for its own special treatment and punishment. Now, it's a few years since all that took place, and you might be forgiven for thinking that it had all gone away. But I have to tell you, it hasn't. And all those who are committed to the future of the free press need to understand that. And just to remind those of you who haven't followed it line by line of the story so far, Leveson wanted the press all of us, to be subject to a body which was recognised in law, in other words, by politicians, as being an effective regulator. And in order to do this, the government brought into being a royal charter on press regulation to produce a body to recognise a self-regulatory organisation using criteria that they had agreed not with the press, but with the anti-press hacked-off lobby group. Parliament then decided to underpin this charter, to which no serious publications have signed up, and in my view never will, with legislation to force publishers into a regulator of which the politicians approve. And in what became the Crime and Courts Act of 2013, they introduced exemplary damages in libel and privacy cases, which can be imposed on any publisher who is not part of a recognised body. But even more damaging, they introduced legislation to punish the press with something called cost shifting. That is, making us pay the other side's costs in the libel or privacy action, even if what we've written is the truth and we win the action. And that, as Gerald mentioned just now, is what has become known as the infamous Section 40. Now, Section 40 has not yet been implemented, but if it were, it would be the first time any government anywhere in the free world had introduced a law which punishes people for telling the truth. Because of the crippling costs involved, and you can imagine, well, many of you may well know that just one libel action would cost many hundreds of thousands of pounds to defend. There would be a huge chilling impact on investigative reporting, as Section 40 would give all those who wish to suppress a journalist's inquiries a blank cheque to bring a legal action, knowing that they would not have to pick up the costs, but we would. Very few publications could ever let a case get to court, so would either have to stop investigating something at the moment a legal action was threatened, or publish and then be forced to apologise for something that is accurate and in the public interest. It is something that would have made, for instance, the Telegraph's exposure of MPs' expenses, which I think you will all remember, almost impossible to have done, because simply a handful of threats from MPs would have meant we would have had to have ceased the investigation. It was intended, in short, as very crude blackmail to force us all into a state-sponsored system of regulation. Now, some politicians say to me, and people who are not part of the industry, well, why don't you just join up to an approved regulator? Well, there are two very good answers to that. The first is that the press cannot be free if its regulation is dictated by the state, and that's what the system of recognition is about. It is conducted by a body called the Press Recognition Panel, which was established in law, is funded by the taxpayer, and is underpinned by legislation. So it is statutory regulation setting out the bounds of content regulation. In other words, what all of you can write. But the second reason is that, to add insult to injury, the body that has been granted recognition, called Impress, is wholly funded by the press-hating mogul Max Mosley, who will stop at nothing to curb the freedom of the press and our ability to report in the public interest. And its board and director have repeatedly attacked newspapers and magazines and could never by any stretch of the imagination be considered impartial. So that is the nightmare of the post-Leveson world of press regulation that was created a few years ago and haunts us still. Either you join a government-backed regulator funded by an anti-press campaigner, or you face crippling costs for telling the truth. But there is hope. As I said earlier, this system has not been put into effect, and the government has been consulting on what to do about it. A public consultation earlier in the year produced 140,000 responses. That's a whacking great response to a public consultation, amid huge disquiet from the public about the impact of the system on a free press. And we're now expecting the results of that consultation before Christmas, and I very much hope that they will make clear that the imposition of Section 40 was a mistake and move to take it from the statute book, and we continue to lobby very hard to put the industry's case. Otherwise, even if not implemented, it will hang there forevermore, a sort of sword of Damocles hanging over all those, including everyone in this room, who wants to write free from state interference and to investigate fearlessly in the public interest. So watch this space. Now, let me end on an optimistic note for tonight, is about celebrating the highest quality journalism, celebrating the specialist press's unique role, and above all, celebrating success. For everyone here tonight, those of you who are about to receive awards and those of you who haven't, is a winner by being part of a wonderful, dynamic industry. I pay tribute to all that you have achieved and continue to achieve, and thank you ever so much for asking me to join you this evening. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.